Buenas tardes. Before I begin, I'd just like to say how this presentation came about. And it was one of your colleagues who approached the Architecture Archive about a year ago to see how they get information on Henry J. Lyons. And the answer back was next to nothing. So I subsequently met the director of the Architecture Archive, Colin Reardon, and I agreed that I would get the board to donate our archive drawings on permanent loan to the Architecture Archive. So I hope we can do that. So just in terms of my sources for this presentation, were in the first instance the drawings, which are stored in that hole upstairs. But a lot of the drawings are missing, misfiled, or lost. But I had no correspondence file, so I had no context as such. So I had to look further, and what was very useful for me was a trade journal called The Irish Engineer and Builder, which was started publishing in 1890 up to about 1960. And that was a mine full of information. It was a trade journal that was published twice monthly, and it's a very fine journal if you're doing any research. So in terms of, I'd say the early years, what I mean by that is the first 30 to 40 years, up to about 1960. I joined the office in 1973, you can do the maths yourselves. And I didn't want to go there because I knew too much about the work after 1970. So if we can begin. Next. So this is our founder, Henry John Lyons. Right? He was born. And he was a good-looking guy. He was born in 1880 and died in 1947. So he was only 67 when he died. And he was in practice for approximately 30 years. Next. Now, I was keen to find out more about Henry J. So I went to the population census of 1901, and here he's here. Henry John Lyons, at age 19, occupation architect. Now, I think his father probably jumped the gun at this stage because he didn't become a member of the RAI until 1920. Could you go back to that again?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were living here in number 3 Fairview from about 1890, the Lyons family, until about 1938. And I found this drawing next. This is a drawing of number 3 Fairview, Rowan House on Fairview Strand. And we're here till 1938 when they vacated the property. The building was gone now. And in 1938, obviously Henry J. inherited the property and he decided to convert it into a shop. But it was a fairly modest building. So next slide. Yeah, this is the census. I wasn't happy with what I found in 1901, so I went to 1911 census, and this is when Henry J. was living in 29 Waverley Avenue, Clontarf. He was 30 years of age. He was married with 6 children. But what I was interested in was 2 children that weren't here that I knew of, and that was his son Samuel, who took over the practice, and his brother Brian, who had Fiona's job in the practice for a number of years. Now, he had 6 children, another 2, which is 8. When he married again, had another 4 children, so he had a total of 12 children. Now, another thing to notice about this, and I have to say this, is that you will see under religion, Presbyterian, and you'll have to remember that in Dublin in the 1900s, in order to make success in building and the professions, let's say it was useful if you were a Protestant. So now, next slide. Yeah, his professional development, I was interested to see how he became an architect. Now he was, at that time, there was no formal architectural education in Dublin. The School of Architecture in UCD didn't go until 1911, and I think Bowden Street was much later 1942. So in order to become an architect, you were apprenticed or articled to an architect, and he was apprenticed to K. Parry and Ross, or K. Parry, up to about 1917, when he was 37. He joined as well as being an architect, you attended lectures in the AAI in Marion Square, the Architectural Social Environment in Marion Square. And he was very active at the AAI. He was secretary of the history class and entered a number of competitions. He joined the Society of Architects in 1912. Now the Society of Architects was I'm not sure what it was, but it was kind of a junior branch of the RIBA. And I noticed on his early drawings, he uses Henry J. Lyons MSA, which is member of the Society of Architects. Next slide. Now, this is the first drawing that we're aware of that Henry J. Lyons prepared. As I said, he was active in the architectural social environment and entered a number of competitions. And he won a scholarship for this drawing, which is a measured drawing of the casino in Reno. In 1899 he prepared this drawing. So he was only 18 or 19 years of age. So he's obviously quite talented and very useful in architecture. The casino is in Reno. It's an exquisite miniature Palladian house, which was built in about 1770. It's worth a visit, but I think it's closed at the moment. But if you Google the casino in Reno, there's quite nice photographs in there. So that was 1899, his first drawing. So next, I just put this in. This is his certificate for the Society of Architects, 1912. So in 1917, he obviously left K. Parry and he set up practice here in 14 South Bennett Street. It's not, this is 12. Number 14 is where John and Crescenzi, the Italian restaurant is now. But he was here. But what struck me about number 14, it was in this small Georgian house, is that going through Tom's directory, there were several tenants in the building over the period of 40 years, up to about 1965. So, and his output was enormous. So, I don't know how he delivered the work that he produced. He probably didn't have more than 10 people. So, I think where the next slide is it. Oh yeah, now we look at some of his work. The first couple of slides are housing he designed in the early years. And now, housing wasn't their kind of core business. His core business was factory buildings and cinemas. But he did some housing, obviously, like every other architect at the time. This is a sort of typical Edwardian villa. This is in Mount Marion Avenue, still there. And he built a few of these, a couple in Foxrock and in Clontarf. This is 1932, that says, yeah. Next. Oh yeah, it's for floor plan, sorry. Next slide. Now, in the Irish engineering and building, there was a reference to Henry J. Lyons, in that Henry J. Lyons has designed 11 handsome semi-detached villas in Hannahville Park in Termure. And the contractor was actually John Hanna, so I don't know what the connection was between John Hanna and Hannahville Park. Now, what's interesting about these, they're semi-Vs, but in 1922, look, there were garages for cars, which is quite early. Next. Now, this is more mundane semi-Ds that the practice got involved in the late 40s and 50s, and they did quite a number of these schemes. I mean, these type of houses are, as you know, are all over Dublin, north and south. These were in Greenleaf Road, Termure, 1940. I thought this drawing was interesting because it was one of the few drawings that kind of had a modern movement style about it. And this was in Blackbanks in Raheny. And it actually is signed by Samuel Lyons, his son. So I think, and I'm not sure, I think the Lyons may have lived in this house, and it's still there. Next. Now, in terms of city centre buildings, there's not a lot. But he did well out of 1916 in that he reconstructed quite a number of properties that were damaged during 1916 in Middle Abbey Street, in Henry Street, and an Eden Key. Now this is a building that I wasn't aware of. It's the Lyons department store in Westmoreland Street, which is on the corner of Westmoreland Street and Fleet Street. Lyons was a kind of a, with Louis Copeland of its day, it was a gentleman's outfitters. So he designed this in 1924, which is quite early, and it was a steel frame, and it appears to be clad in some kind of marble, I'm not sure, and had a sprinkler system. Now it only lasted 10 years, because the photograph on the left, the perspective, is 1924. The one on the right is about 1936, when the building was bought by the Educational Building Society. It was subsequently redeveloped by Sam Stevenson, who today it's a glass facade, and that's by Sam Stevenson. Next, now we come on to his factory buildings. Now he had a particular expertise in the design of factory buildings, because there are dozens of factories that he designed, and he had particular expertise in factories for food manufacturing, for chocolate and sweets, and flour, and he had several of these projects on the go at the one time. This is the famous Roundtree Mackintosh factory in Inchicore. It's opposite Kilmainham Jail. It's now the Hilton Hotel. In fact, it was John Laddie who demolished this in 2004. And it had a kind of checkered history, because it was originally built in 1933, but it was burnt down in 1935 and rebuilt in 1939. And it was covered extensively in the press when it was opened in 1939, and was said to be very progressive in terms of food manufacturing factories and the welfare of staff, and provided with restaurants and medical facilities, etc. But it was, and that was in 1939. Next, some drawings of we have quite a few drawings of this of the factory in 1939. But as usual, we have no drawings of the original factory in 1933, which is a shame. Now, it was a huge factory. I think there's an elevation in the next slide. Now, Henry Lyons carried out a fit-out of that building on O'Connell Street in 1944. And that shop in O'Connell Street is immortalised in Ulysses, apparently. Next, another factory. This was Brown and Polson. I'm sure some of you recognise the name. They made corn flour. This was in Talent Avenue in Harold's Cross. And it's still there. It's still there.
Woodworkers now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Now, you'll see from most of the factories that were characterised by these sawtooth north lights, and a lot of these didn't survive. They were replaced with flat roofs. I think there's an elevation now of Brown Boots again. You see someone was working on the lettering. But it's still there. Next. This is a large factory which he did for Healy's. There were printers and they provided office supplies. Now, I think they still have a shop. If you Google Healy's, it's still there. This was in the East Wall Road, an enormous factory. And again, you can see the roof light. Now, I think some of it is still there. I'm not sure, because I Googled it, and I think there's some of it left. It was built by G&T Crafton. Next. This is an elevation drawing. There relies some of the drawings, some of the negatives are very fragile and haven't survived that great. The drawings that have survived are drawings that were printed out in heavy duty paper and coloured by hand. This is another factory, NKM factory in Rathmines. They made toffees. It was on the Rathmines, Lower Rathmines Road, which was here. This is Lower Rathmines. Now, this is a later edition, 1935. 23. The factory was back here, but I couldn't find any drawings of the original factories, but it was published in the Irish Times, and looked quite competent.
Is that still there?
I think, no, it's gone. I think Aldi or one of those is there now. Next, another factory for RW and W Scotland, Wellington Farm R10. And this also is still there. Ireland stopped made jams and preserves. This is 1948. Next. Now, as he designed a number of petrol stations and garages in the early 20s, because obviously the people were buying cars and there was demand for petrol. This is, there was one in Fairview called Edge's Garage, which was burned down in 56, and there was another one for a Mr. Spratt in Bray, the main station in Bray. This was for George Cooney in Kells, County Meath. And it's 1919, right? And it's kind of cool, I think. You know, it's like Las Vegas meets art and crafts. And the two bookends at either end were for the staff, for cottages for the staff. So next slide. So hey presto, it's still there. It's still there. I mean, the two houses are gone, unfortunately. Next. Filling stations again. In the 60s, Henry Lyons designed a number of petrol stations for the McMullen brothers. And I put this up because they're quite a nice set of drawings. And they're obviously with the contract drawings because they're signed up here. And this was a petrol filling station in Broadstone. And I think the Lewis station might be thereabouts. But it was very elaborate because, look, there's only 4 petrol pumps and a tiny little pay station. But the elaborate stonework at the back, unfortunately it's gone now. Next. So now we come to his main contribution, which was and I suppose it could be said that this was his main claim to fame. His lasting legacy was his contribution to the design of cinemas. Cinemas in the Art Deco style, because that was obviously the central style at the time. Now the golden age for the construction of cinemas in Dublin, and also at Dublin, was in the years following the First World War and Irish independence in the 20s, the 30s and 40s. Now, by the mid-1950s, there was a staggering 60 cinemas in Dublin and county. These cinemas were mainly located in the new Dublin suburbs, both in middle-class areas and working-class areas, i.e. Rathmines, Montmerion, Cabra, Whitehall, Philsborough, etc. Now, by the turn of the century, the number of independent, standalone, single-screen cinemas was reduced to 10. Now, this was due to declining attendances during the 60s and 70s and the advent of television. And obviously the cinemas were too big. Like, some of these cinemas were like from up to 1,600 seats, and they couldn't fill these, you know, because of the size of the cinema. Now, Henry Taylor was responsible for the design of 12 cinemas, which are listed on the screen. Now, only 2 or 3 of these cinemas remain intact today. Sadly, none of these cinemas were listed or protected, which is a shame. Now, if you just have a look at the cinemas. Now, this is the first cinema in 1921. Now, I had a drawing, but we couldn't scan it. It looks a bit gloomy and wasn't in his more exuberant Art Deco style later. It's on the right here, 1921. And it was his client, he had 2 clients, 2 main clients for cinemas. One was a Richard Kirkham, who built 3 cinemas for him, Inchicore, Dundrum and Newbridge. Next, I like the car. Now, this is Fairview's Grand Cinema in Fairview, which was designed and built in 1929, but it had a complete makeover 10 years later in 1939. Now, the elevation, when it was built in 1939, there was no frontage out to Fairview Strand. They didn't have this frontage. And the main entrance was off Fairview Avenue, which I'll show you in a minute on the section. Next, this is an elevation drawing, the front elevation drawing of Fairview. Next. Now this is the section through Fairview. Now, as I said, well, the cinema that was designed in 1929 was apparently a single-story cinema, and was entered here off Fairview Avenue in 1930, and the screen was at this end. And in 1939, it was obviously completely rebuilt when they purchased the land on Fairview Strand. Now, a lot of the sections of the cinema are very similar now, and they did have a form of air handling. Air was pumped in around the stage, and then it was extracted. You see up, it's obviously fairly rudimentary, but it was extracted up in this was the fan up here, and this crow's nest was extracted out at the roof level. Next, this is Fairview as it is today. Now, when attendance declined, cinemas were closed. All these cinemas were closed by 1970. So, what do we do with them? So, obviously, they were suited for sort of supermarkets, Tesco's, and what have you, and Tesco's. And when they moved in, the supermarkets, they gutted the interiors, which is a pity. And actually, this is the only part of Fairview which remains. The cinema itself is gone at the back. I think the balcony is still there, but the cinema itself is gone. That's Fairview. Now, this is a cinema I wasn't aware of at all, and I had no drawings. This is Sutton, 1937. A bit more toned down in terms of its design, but still quite a good building. I'd say this was taken probably in the 60s, this photograph. Next, this is the Gram in Whitehall. Again, it was originally built in 1934. Again, I have no drawings of what was there in 1934, but it was completely redesigned and rebuilt in 1954. And Henry J. himself was dead at this stage. He died in 47. So the office was then taken over by his son, Samuel Lyons. So Sam was responsible for this cinema, the Grand, in Whitehall, which is on Collins Avenue. Now, as I say, a lot of the cinemas when they closed were taken over as bingo halls. And it's interesting here, if you see, and they're taking over one particular group. There's a GL here, GL, and that's the Irish language group, Gailing. We bought separately cinemas and turned them into bingo halls. And you can see, obviously, as they were interested in the Irish language, they called it ungrand. Next. This one I like very much is the cinema in Drumcondra, 1934. And 1934. Now, when they opened, the opening of the cinema was a huge occasion, a huge social occasion. And we're usually opened by the Lord Mayor and blessed by the parish priest. And now, at this time, 1934, I mean, censorship of films were very strict. And when the cinemas were originally built, there was an opposition to cinemas because they were talking about dead iniquities. And to prove that point, I came across an extract from the Irish Independent, October 1920, 1934. The address by the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Alderman A. Byrne, TD, Alfie Byrne, who was, by the way, Lord Mayor of Dublin for 10 consecutive years. Now, in his speech, he said this, and I quote, he had been assured by the management that only the cleanest pictures would be shown, and he thought it was right to emphasise that Dublin would not stand for anything less. Now, this is gone. It's really a shame that Tesco took this over, and they first of all gutted the auditorium, and the facade there for quite some time, but it's gone now. This next one is, go back. This is the Strand Cinema on the North Strand in Dublin, built in 1938. A very fine facade, and it escaped German bombing in 1941, and then most of the North Strand was destroyed. And in terms of reuse of these buildings, the next slide is interesting. This is the facade as it is today. Is the entrance to a block of apartments called the Strand Apartments. So, fair dues to the architects in that case. Next. Now, this is one, again, I didn't know about. This is the Odeon. This is from the Irish Building Engineer in the National Library. And you're basically now allowed to use your iPhone in the library. 1940. This was from that guy I mentioned, Kirkham, who was the client for Inchicore and Newbridge. Next slide. Now, we have no slides of interiors. This is the only slide I could find of an interior of the cinema, but I'll come to that later. And they were obviously quite dramatic in terms of design, lighting, flush seats, curtains, etc. So, and as well as that, you'll notice that all these cinemas had a stage. You know, they weren't like the modern cinema where you had no stage, because you had musical entertainments as well in these cinemas. Now you can see sort of aspects of the Art Deco design in terms of the doorway there and the grills. Next, this is the Ormond Cinema in Dungarvan. Now, and I think this is the only kind of photograph I could find. 1947, and this slide was prepared, or the information was prepared, I believe, by the Waterford Historical Society, who wanted to have this building listed and protected, but they obviously failed because it was demolished a number of years ago. That's done Dungarvan. Canberra was the biggest cinema. It had 1,600 seats, and it is probably the only cinema that's still intact in my view. Now, I said I'd no slides on the interior, but I went to Google Street, it's straight to Google Street, and if you click on Google Street for this building, and you go into people submit photographs, and there's a load of photographs of the interior of this building, and you can see the proscenium arch and some of the architectural detail from the inside. This is, go back to the, yeah, we have a drawing of the elevation, the facade for Canberra. Next slide. This is Canberra today, with, and I think the facade is still intact behind this advertising order. But really, this building should be protected, there's no question about it. Next. Now, this is, I told you that most of the cinemas were closed in the 70s. This is the only cinema which is still operational, which is the Phoenix Cinema in Dingle, which he did in 1939. And it's a family-owned cinema, still is family-owned. And it's the tiniest, apparently, cinema in the lot. It only holds around 150 seats. Now, this is the last cinema I'm going to show you. And this one threw me completely, because there's a book over in the library called The A2Z Guide to Dublin Cinemas. And it says Kilestra Cinema, designed by Henry J. Lyons. But under the description, there's an elevation drawing, which they said was given by Henry J. Lyons. And I couldn't make it out, because the elevation that was under Kilestra was the elevation drawing for Dundrome, for the only Dundrome. So I subsequently found that these drawings were dated 1946, and it's a full set of construction drawings and design drawings, but it was never built. So it's the one that got away. Now, it was designed in 1946, and Henry died in 1947, so I think they lost the job, or maybe the site was sold. But it's a lovely collection of drawings. I think there's one more slide. Yeah, this is the section through Kilestra, which, I mean, they're nice drawings. I mean, I think maybe you can put these up online when people can look at them in more detail, because they're quite interesting to look at. But again, you have this extract yoke with the roof. And go back to the plan. See, at each side of this middle drawing, you see there's a kind of a space here and here. And this is where the fans and the heat were located to temper the air, and then it was extracted at roof level. So, I think that's it.
Lisa, I wonder, could you just explain the relationship of Henry to the Samuel you talked about, to the Sammy that we know and the Tony we know?
Oh, I should have explained that. Henry J. Lyons, as I said, he had 8 children in the first marriage, and I think he had 2 sons called Sam, who was Tony's father, and Brian, who was Tony's uncle. And I think Samuel Lyons was born in 1912. That's why he doesn't appear on the census. So Samuel Lyons, who died in 1981, who took over the practice he joined the practice in the mid-30s, and he died in the same age as his father in 1981, about 68, 69. And Sam Jr. and Tony are his son. So Tony, I think, moved into the practice in about late 60s, I think, and before we moved to Lower Bagot Street in 1971. Now Martin Heenan wasn't in Frederick Street, he joined a year before me, in about 71, 72. So that's the...
Great, thanks very much. Okay, I think we're done with this.